All right. Hello, everyone. It's so nice to see everyone. Yay. All right. Thank you all for coming to Butter. It's the second year. This is like so exciting. I'm so excited to see like these wonderful faces in the crowd. And to be able to facilitate this talk, my name is Greg Rose. I'm the curator and program director at 1000 Words Indie. And I have the pleasure of talking to the amazing artist and hopefully new friend, Samuel Levi Jones. So I'm gonna read this really quickly, and then we can start our chat. Samuel Levi Jones is inspired by questions of authority and representation in recorded history. The artist is known for challenging historical and contemporary power structures through the act of taking apart source materials and generating new perspectives from which to grapple with society's ongoing ignorance and empathy. Jones's practice centers on physically undoing objects associated with systems of power and control, often rearranging them deconstructed books into grid-like compositions that expose their flaws and question their assumed command on the truth. As he explains, I am ultimately thinking about information, and that is selectively left out. His work examines urgent questions on how oppression is embodied in the systems of law enforcement, education, and as well as industries in medicine, athletics, and fine art. That is amazing. So good, so good. So, like this past day or two, I've been reading so much about you and seeing your work. And I'm really curious, like, what was the first work that you've ever fell in love with?
I don't have a particular work that I sort of fell in love with, but I fell in love with artist, photographer Gordon Parks. I think at the time, because I was working through the medium of photography, and I was really inspired and amazed by all that he had done. He was sort of a Renaissance man, if you will, and didn't realize or had learned that he had directed the movie, the original Shaft. And he had done a number of different things. He was like the first in so many things, and that was like very inspiring.
That's like really cool. So, how did like his work kind of inspire you to get into the arts?
I was inspired by, I started working with the camera because it was sort of my way of seeing things, sort of capturing, slowing down, and sort of seeing the worlds. And I felt that his work did that, and it depicted like what was going on, if you will. Yeah.
I can say that you've definitely accomplished that goal. Like your work to me inspires this sense of community, this sense of togetherness, and like patchworking of thoughts that is like really cool.
Thank you.
No problem, no problem. So I'm curious about that journey. You said you started in photography. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
So I have a degree in communication studies, and I took a photography class my last semester during that time, and had really considered being involved in the arts, art making, and that got my attention. And then some years after that, put together a project and applied to the Heron School of Art. And then an instructor of mine talked me into applying to grad school. But during my our undergrad experience, I was doing different things outside of the camera, making sculpture, doing some video work, and then it just progressed from that into like what I'm doing now.
Oh, that's lovely. That's lovely. So you said you took on fine arts in grad school. Once you graduated, what'd you do? Like, what happened?
I applied for a couple different jobs that didn't work out, and then I ended up, later that fall, I ended up being in a large group exhibition in Los Angeles. And I ended up meeting the artist by the name of Mark Bradford, who we met with one evening, and we had a long discussion about what I was doing, my work, and just sort of like pursuing, an art career, if you will. And it was through Mark that I met an individual who gave me my first sort of commercial exhibition, if you will, in Los Angeles. That was in 2013.
Also, like, soft claps to that. Like, a conversation led you to like having this solo exhibition. So, do you think like relationship building is a huge part of the art practice as well?
Definitely, for sure. It's, through building relationships, having conversations, meeting people, learning about people, and then through those conversations, they sort of, like for example, if you and I are talking, and I feel that you may hit it off with someone else, and I think that's the way in which it works. And we were talking about this idea of like, going to a gallery as an artist and like going to like them with your portfolio, like on a cold call, if you will, is like probably not an advice that I would give. And I think for the most part, the way in which I've experienced things, they've come through relationships and having conversations and connecting people with other people.
So, like, when you have those conversations, do you have like an elevator pitch?
I don't. I just, and myself, talk about my work, and hopefully that will sort of, lead to something naturally in an organic way, rather than trying to, impose myself on others. If you come from an authentic place, things will work out.
So, okay, we're going to cycle back. So you had your first exhibition, right? After that, did you like sell out? Did you get swooped up? What did that process look like?
Well, that first exhibition that I had, it was a rough go. There were some complications. I ended up showing up to the gallery one day with a couple of friends to like grab my work. And then I ended up having a conversation with someone else and had an exhibition. And just sort of, it's kind of like, it was like a snowball effect. And from that first exhibition, more people saw my work, and then I ended up having another conversation with another dealer who discovered me. And then from that point, I started working with my Chicago gallery by the name of Patron. I started working with them in 2015, still working with them, and now I'm working with New York Gallery, that also has a gallery in Paris that I work with, and a gallery in Los Angeles.
So, I love this relationship theme. I feel like we're going to keep bringing that up. So, what was the relationship like with your first gallery?
With my Chicago gallery, they were a gallery that just opened in 2015.
Okay.
And we had a conversation, it was a good vibe, I wanted to be a part of what they were doing. And then, being that they were a smaller gallery, they also encouraged me to work with another gallery that was more established. And then that became my New York gallery, Gallery Lelong. And they actually approached me. They just sent me an email. I had a visit. I did some research with, I researched the gallery a little bit, and there were certain things about it that interested me. One of them was that the artists that they represent, more than half of them were female. So like that really was inspiring in terms of my interest in like equity and social practice. Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely. I'm like, I love when your personal beliefs can be amplified by your art practice.
Yeah, for sure. And I think with that being said, I think in sort of entering the art world, or like putting yourself out there, it's important to try to, remain who you are and not make decisions that sort of go against your beliefs. and your own personal integrity, because it can be a confusing thing, I think.
So, you had the first gallery, right? Was it a learning experience? Like, what were some of the, like, if you can give me some of the great points and then some of the points of concern.
You know, there was one gallery in particular that I worked with, and there were some some placements that happened and some discounts that were given that weren't discussed with the dealer and I. And at that point, I made the decision to not continue trying to have a relationship. And then when I went to another gallery, or my Chicago gallery, there were certain things, I can't remember what they were exactly, but there were certain things that happened that they did where I was just like we would have that conversation rather than just sort of doing whatever they felt like they should do with their work. Like they would run it by me first. And it sort of was more of a process of learning as you go along, but at the same time too, and having conversations. It's important to have conversations with other artists, but that can be difficult as well because sometimes artists will share information and others won't. They'll just sort of look at you, and I'm sort of at this point where I've had conversation with another artist, a particular artist, and I think from that one artist, 3 or more artists have come to me who've spoken with that person, and we just sort of talk shop and we talk about how we navigate this thing. And I think it's important to do that and have those exchanges so you can sort of you're giving information the way in which an artist hopefully isn't having as difficult time as they would, and they can navigate it a little bit easier.
Honestly, I feel like that's a strength that Indiana has. Like, our sense of community is so strong and deeply rooted in our arts and culture. We're always here for each other. When we were talking earlier, you were saying how important it is to have a strong group of people around you. Do you mind sharing some of the people that were able to help you through that process?
I have a number of collectors who are very supportive, and so also with one of my galleries, that relationship started because of a collector of mine who has a good relationship with a gallery. So it can happen in a number of different ways, and usually it happens in that way rather than going directly to a gallery. It could be another artist who's in the gallery, a collector who works with a gallery, or some other individual, maybe a curator who has a relationship with a gallery. But I think too, it's important to, and I had this conversation with someone earlier this week about how it's important to have people around you who support you, uplift you, empower you, and you have to, I don't know, for me, I'm come to this point where if I'm engaging with something that isn't serving me, I have to have the willingness to let it go and move on and not feel obligated to maintain that.
That's so great to hear. Because, sometimes you have those thoughts, but it's really nice to be able to hear it back.
It's challenging. It's easier said than done, but I think the sooner that you practice something, the easier it becomes, and it just becomes second nature.
So what, sort of professional infrastructure do you have around you? Do you have a lawyer, an accountant, an agent?
I don't have an agent. I have a studio manager who sort of helps me with a lot of the communication with my galleries. Or, right now I'm doing an artist residency at IU in Bloomington, and she's helping me with the communication with them and sort of orchestrating that and figuring out my scheduling and things like that. I don't have a personal assistant who works with me in the gallery who's making. I'm actually, but I'm having conversations with individuals who, I'm working with an local artist who's working on some fabricating for me, who welds. I don't have that knowledge or know-how. So I'm expanding in that way and expanding in a way in which I'm sort of building a team who can help me formulate my thoughts into objects or projects, if you will. And that's all very new to me, but it's exciting. At first I was nervous about it because I'm just kind of keep to myself, and like I'm in the studio alone a lot, I just do my thing, and I was like, so I'm taking on new projects, but like it's exciting. It's actually, yeah, it's like it's a reminder that it's like good to engage with people, and I'm working with some wonderful people. You know, it's very energizing.
So, and to like stay on the point of like relationships, right? I feel like one thing that creates a really successful relationship is like knowing what you need, right? It's like being able to identify, here are the things that I need to be fulfilled in. Here are my strengths, here are my weaknesses. I feel like that's one thing that you personally are really great at in regards of your art practice. How did you develop that?
It took some time. You know, I think early on there were situations where I didn't know what I wanted. And I think that was okay. I wouldn't be overwhelmed with that. I just sort of like kind of stuck with what I was comfortable with. You know, I had a conversation with a dealer once, and they were telling me all these things that they could provide me, and I was like thinking like, I don't need that, I'm not ready for that, and never once did they ask me what I wanted, so I just moved along. But I think too, in sort of working with, you know, a gallery or whatever individual it may be, that you have wants, expectations, and whatnot, and hopefully it's a situation to where they are acknowledging those wants and desires and like doing what they can to help you get to those goals. More so than, you know, hopefully it's a constructive conversation rather than, you know, making a request and having extreme pushback. And that's like, again, goes back to like a situation where it may not be serving you, and you have to be willing to like move along and find the things that do that.
So when you're able to identify the want, the need that you have, what does that process look like to find that solution, to find that fulfillment?
There's a project that I made in graduate school, and there's a way in which I wanted it to be displayed in an exhibit. And it's a work that not very many people are familiar with. And when I first made that work, or when I was making it in graduate school 10 years ago, like I had this idea in mind. And over the past couple of years, I've had conversations with my galleries, and I say, this is what I want. Like, this is what I want. This is where I want this work to be seen, how it to be seen, or how it should be seen, or how I feel it should be seen. And then having conversations with each of my galleries until one of them, you know, I'm sure that all of them were making some sort of effort to make that happen, but I think I'm finally at a place to where it's going to happen. And also, I mentioned that I work with 4 galleries, and I think in an ideal situation, each of those galleries is providing something unique that, you know, one other gallery, you know, can't provide. But I've been asked, they're like, how did you like produce like that much work? And I actually don't. Like sometimes, you know, one of those galleries may not get a work within a given year, and they may only get like, or, you know, I may have an exhibition with, you know, gallery number 2, if you will, and then like the other 3 galleries may not get anything. Yeah. So it's like, I think it's too, where it's a situation where you have to figure out what it is that you want and not necessarily base it on what other artists are doing.
Yeah. Like how, now I'm like a fan right now. I'm like question, answer. So how do you create that workflow, right? That still allows you to be a person, allows you to live, but also keep you generating new, fresh ideas?
I think there was a period of time where I got into a mode where I was sort of like, I had like my work down, if you will, and making it, but it's evolved like visually over time. And now I'm at a point to where I don't know, I'm dabbling in different ideas and trying different things, like some sculptures that I've worked on. And it's really sort of about, you know, carving out a space where you can generate new ideas, but also like keeping it fresh. Like I have to keep it fresh for myself and keep it exciting, because, you know, doing the same thing over and over can get quite boring. It may work, but that's not challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like awestruck. I'm like, oh, you have all the secrets. So, okay, if you have all the secrets for me, who has all the secrets for you?
Expound on that.
So, like, who do you get a chance to talk to that's an artist that you can,
It's I don't have as many conversations as I used to, but I think in terms of most of the conversations that I have had recently are about navigating the gallery space. But in terms of having a conversation where ideas are being generated, like those happen in different ways. My studio manager, we have lots of conversations to generate ideas as well. And then like, there's a sculpture that I'm working on right now that's made from a large football tackling sled, and like I have a conversation with that individual, and we sort of like come up with a plan to where sort of figure out like what it would ultimately look like visually. So it comes from so many different places. It may come from like someone who's not even involved in the arts and have a conversation with them, and like ideas are generated from that. Like it's like so many different things. It's not one or two things or sources.
so again, it's all about having that like strong community around you to be able to like bounce ideas and find solutions quickly.
I think it's that, but it's also too. It's sort of all of it becomes part of the practice. And I remember having a conversation with someone once, and they were talking about process, and I said the process like happens from the point you wake up in the morning. It can even happen like in a dream state. Like something may happen while you're sleeping, and wake up and be like, oh, I should try that. I should do that. Like it's all like connected.
That's so cool. So when we were talking earlier about working with multiple galleries, I was asking about like compensation. Like, do you have to share? Do do they compete with each other?
I think there probably definitely is some sort of competition.
Yeah.
And I think it's dependent upon the artist and how they interact or they don't interact. I've heard artists who like a particular artist who has said that likes that there's like drama between their galleries. Like I don't know why or how that could be productive, but it works for them, I guess. But my galleries are typically in conversation, or I have them interact, and like especially like pricing at work. One of my galleries I have conversation with, and if there's a price change or price increase, then they communicate with the other galleries so that they're all on the same page. And then in terms of even, exhibiting, like having exhibitions, like for the most part, I sort of like communicate that where it's like, I'm going to have an exhibition with this gallery at this time or this year. And then there's conversation around like for art fairs, like what's being shown, like who's showing work or who's not showing work for various reasons. Yeah.
So, with being represented by 4 galleries, how do you still keep your autonomy?
I don't, typically when I exhibit with a given gallery, an exhibition may only happen once every 3 or 4 years. So, I have an exhibition with my New York gallery in the spring and one in Paris in the fall. So I'm just starting to focus on those exhibitions. I am now, and I'm working on some things. And I really don't think about what I'm doing with the others so much until we come up with a project or there's work that they need for an art fair. But it's just sort of, I don't know, just kind of like bounce around from one to the other, and it's working. I think some people think it sounds like it's overwhelming to work with so many galleries, but for me, it hasn't been. Yeah.
I really feel like it's a strength of yours to like have the needs and then finding those solutions.
Yeah, and they change and they evolve. And there comes a point to where your needs change and you have to express those needs, and hopefully they can be met.
Yeah.
And if they can't be met, then you have to make a decision whether you're going to like continue on that path or not.
So, can you tell us a little bit about the first time you had to make that decision?
Well, I will speak of the very first exhibition. It was interesting because the partner of the dealer had a conversation with me like the day after the opening, and they said, you know, he represents you now, and I was just like, no, he doesn't. And it was just a very sort of like forced, kind of like heavy-fisted, it felt like, heavy-handed, if you will. And I decided at that moment, like I was just going to move on. And there's a number of times where I've had opportunities that were very exciting that I've said no to. I was going to participate in a traveling exhibition that was like part of a movie premiere. And they didn't want to write the contract to my satisfaction. And I said no. It was a pretty cool opportunity. But I just like knew, and I had a previous experience where it didn't go the way that I wanted. I used that to sort of remind myself that it's okay to say no. And it goes back to that idea of like, if it's not serving you, you can't be afraid of missing an opportunity and something else not coming along. You have to be sort of very sure in what you're doing and remain strong in that, in the decisions that you make.
That's still so scary.
It can be, but it's just sort of, I think that if you make a decision that goes against what you feel and what you want, and as you go along, if you keep doing that, it becomes more and more difficult to pull back. And so it's like creating a pattern or a habit. And you have to sort of set those things like early on so that you can, so that you can be at peace with yourself and what you're doing.
Again, so inspired. So inspired. So another thing that we were talking about earlier is like the keep going. The like not letting those scary negative no's kind of like stopping you from creating the work, doing the work. So what are some of the things that inspire you to keep going?
For me, it's environment, I think. I was in San Francisco Bay Area for 5 years, and in Chicago for 2 years, been back here for 5 years, and it's a great working environment. For me, there aren't a lot of distractions, and I can focus on what I'm doing and not pay attention to like what's going on outside of me, because that can be a distraction as well. Trying not to pay so much attention to like what others are doing or like what they've accomplished, what they've not accomplished. And I have a family, and that a major part of my time is being in the studio and being with them. I travel quite a bit, but it's nice to sort of be removed from a lot of it, and it makes it easier to be selective about the things that I choose to like go do and see.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like you have a very grounded art practice, and it's more about you being able to communicate your vision than it is about being into this. So that's really, again.
Yeah, it's there's a definite thing where you try to remain within the practice, and that you don't allow these things to sort of let your practice become something else or deviate from what it was originally intended to do. That can be an easy thing to do, but that's just how I operate, and that's how I choose to operate, and it works for me. I'm comfortable with it. Yeah.
I think we're at like the 30-minute mark. I want to open up the floor to some questions. Is that cool? Yeah, great. I'm going to pass the mic around. Awesome. Yeah, cute. Okay.
Good morning. I have a two-part question. So my first question is, I'm a photographer. So you talked about how you previously you liked to do stuff by yourself, and now like you've been accepting help. How was that journey, and how do you find like getting help useful? And then my second question is, you also talked about being selective. Were you ever nervous about being selective? Did you ever feel like you were missing out on opportunities, or were you just like, you know what, I know what I want, and then everything kind of like fell into place for you?
For, regarding the first question, getting to the point of allowing other people to be around me and help me, like I just sort of, there comes a point to which I realized there were certain things that I want to do that I don't have the skill set to do it. And if I want to like see that vision come forth, then I have to be willing to like have vulnerability and involve other people. So there was just it's just a growing process. And then your second question, could you repeat it?
Yeah, my second question is, you talked about being selective, and as an artist, were you nervous about being selective, or because of your selection, everything kind of fell into place for you?
I mean, I definitely was nervous about things like that opportunity that I had with the film. Like, I really wanted to do it. It's I think it goes back to like the relationships that you have and having people around you, even in having conversations. There was a conversation that came up earlier about artists within the fair who are having galleries or people approach them already. And I think, don't feel like there's a sense of urgency. Because if they're coming to you, they're coming to you for a reason, because they're interested. And it's important to vet people, and that's through having conversations with other people who've worked with them. Really, it's about having a conversation and trying to have a real honest conversation. Because there are a lot of situations where people who are, this is cross-contextual, but people who are in positions of power, and they abuse that power. And so if you're working with a gallery, like that's a position of power. Like, they're working with artists who are, working with something that's very meaningful to them. And you have to like go through the process of trying to understand and be comfortable with them, like having that and working with them. And if something feels wrong, I kind of work instinctually a lot, like through energy. And if I feel something is off, like I'll investigate it, I'll think about it, I'll slow down and try to have a conversation and figure out why it is that I'm feeling that way. But sort of, like have a conversation, like look through a roster and like engage with an artist who's working with that gallery, if you can. Try to vet as much as possible. But never be afraid to say no. Like but I think to answer your question, I had, a situation where I was in an artist residency in San Francisco, and it was maybe about a year after I finished graduate school, and someone came to my studio and they offered to buy up a group of work. And I didn't like the way in which they approached me. It was just, something was off about it. And they said they were there strictly for business, and like they're sitting in my studio and they're trying to have like a real human interaction with me. And soon after, I was going to have another exhibition, and I said, well, if none of this work is placed, it's going to go to my next exhibition. He said, well, what if that doesn't happen? And I said, no, it's going to happen. And you sort of have to, realize and understand your worth and your value, and work with other people who respect that and give, that same precedence to it.
Thank you so much.
Hello. Whoa. Okay. So, my question is, what has been your biggest challenge in your career to date, and how did you overcome it?
I think my biggest challenge was like my time after graduate school. So at that point, when I went to graduate school, that was the first time that I had a studio. All of my making was within academia, and I was terrified. I was like, well, there's no, up until that point, I was working against deadlines or projects. And so at that point, once I finished grad school, it was an independent situation. There was no one there to hold accountability for me. So that was probably one of the more challenging times, but I had a great experience in grad school, and the work that I made has a direct relationship to like what I'm making now. I was working with books at the time. But yeah, I think just that transition, and like I had no idea like what the commercial art world was or what it was about. Like I thought that I was going to like, get a teaching position right after graduate school, and yeah, I think so. Despite those challenges, sort of, I think I was very open to possibilities and what may come. And I had at that point, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I just sort of was open to, what may come to me.
All right, awesome. Thank you.
I got a question about, so what was your process like getting a studio manager, and like how much control or responsibilities do they have?
Through still studio manager? Well, the person I have, she's a very trusted individual. We've been friends for like 13 years. She does my bookkeeping for me, and she works directly with my accountant. I hate dealing with that stuff. And she communicates, like, typically I don't look at my studio emails. Like, if something is important that needs to be addressed, then she, like, comes to me. Otherwise, she takes care of it. So, for example, I have an exhibition in Copenhagen right now, and she helped, like, deal with the communication with that and, like, setting up the shipment of work. And, like, I made the work, handed it over to someone who created it, and, like, they handle the rest. So she'll help me with scheduling and just like a lot of communication, because it comes to a point to where it's like I was having a conversation with an artist earlier who reached out to me, like, I emailed you, like, we were going to meet up, and like then I didn't hear from you. I was like, oh, I'm sorry, like, here's my number. So it's like, so communication is a challenge as well, because through the progression of my career, like, there's so many more people that I'm communicating with. So she really helps me, like, with that process, and sort of keeps me aligned to make sure I'm responding to people through the different, like, exhibitions or, like, through the residency that I'm doing. And it can be a number of different things, but, like, yeah, communication and bookkeeping. And that may be, like, we recently had a conversation about getting someone who's an intern, and they may be responsible for cataloging my work, because that's sort of a task that the galleries, they do catalog my work, but it's important to also, like, for me to do it. And my studio manager's been doing that, but she, like, wants help doing that. And then I don't do a very good job at, like, keeping my website up to date. I want to keep it somewhat up to date, so I think if we hire an intern, like, they will do those responsibilities as well. But you kind of, like, figure things out as you go along, and if, like, there's a new need that needs to be met, then, trying to get someone else to help, if you will.
Oh yeah, that helps. I guess I was looking at the process of like how you chose the manager, but at the same time, like, hearing you say that you have the same, like, day-to-day problems or issues that I have, like updating the website or just, doing the little tedious stuff that you either don't have time to do or don't want to do. And then you're sitting like, oh shit, I got to get this done now. So I just been trying to figure out, like, that next process in the evolution, I think.
Yeah, it's through, in the conversation that we had about getting an intern, like, I'll share this information anyway, but, like, I'm doing the residency in Bloomington, and, like, so it's like, could there be, through a conversation of people that I'm working with down there, maybe there's a student who can work remotely and do some of these things. And I think it's just really a matter of, like, going back to having a conversation and building relationships and if you're having a conversation with someone that a need that you may have, and you're looking for someone, and like, oh, I have this person who can help out. Yeah, it's just a matter of having a conversation about what your needs are. And some people are not, there are times where you're having conversations that it feels like you're talking to a wall, but just don't have that fear and like continue to have a conversation. Like, which reminds me of when we were talking earlier about working with galleries. I have, a particular friend who had a bad experience with a gallery, and this was like, roughly 10 years ago. And now they're afraid to continue or to build a new relationship with another gallery. And I think, through challenges and through difficulties, or bad experiences, you have to brush it off and not have fear going into the next relationship, and that the same things are going to happen. But yet I think through conversation, having lots of conversations, things sort of come together in that way.
Right on, right on.
Can you kind of speak to the subject of what you were saying as far as your friend? She's afraid of the gallery experience because she had a bad experience. Can you kind of speak to how she operates as an artist, kind of without that gallery representation, and kind of how that works in between time?
I think, I know a number of artists who don't work with galleries, and they do a great job at selling their own work, promoting themselves, and they're doing just fine. But I think it just depends on what you personally. I think the advantage to, and we discussed this earlier, sort of common practice for a commission for a gallery is 50%. And it seems like a lot, but hopefully they're doing things to earn that 50%, if you will. For example, I had art fair in Miami in 2019. There was a project space that happened. It was for large scale work, and it's expensive to hold that booth. And we were hoping that the work would place. It didn't place, so they were out that money, if you will. They invested, and so hopefully they're putting in some degree of investment to earn that. And then I think it also allows the artist to focus purely on making their work and trying to multitask and do all these other things. And that's building relationships with even clients, or collectors. That can be a tricky thing. I have some collectors that are good friends, and there are others that I don't want to engage with. So it creates that degree of separation so that you can focus on the studio practice.
Thank you.
Hi, yes. Do you ever get nervous or have a sense of anxiety or fear when showcasing your newer pieces? Or is it just a sense of confidence knowing that you're goated in the lane that you're in?
Hasn't happened a lot. There was a recent work that I made that I was a little uncertain about putting out in the world, and I was like, screw it, I'm just going to put it out there and be okay with it. And there was a good response to it. I don't do that too often, but I think for the most part, when I make something, I'm very I am definitely more excited about some works than others. But it's a feeling when something is complete, there is okay, this is working. So I think even in this work that I'm making, when I first started deconstructing the books, I laid, I peeled the book covers away from the cardboard and laid it down on the floor, just two book covers laying next to each other. And I knew in that moment, because it was visually interesting, but also the conceptual relationship to what it was representing. So it just becomes, I think there is a degree of confidence, but it comes from the discovery, or knowing there are things that I've tried where I'm just this isn't working. But I think that comes from within, and then it comes from having a conversation with others about your work. But I think for me, for the most part, it came from within. There was a work that I made in graduate school, and it was a reactionary work to another artist. And when I shared the idea of doing it, a person on my committee, sort of questioned me, maybe challenging that artist. I did it anyway. I made the work, and then when they came back to my studio and saw the first parts of it, they paused, and they said, "This is working." But I felt that, and I knew it. Yeah, and it's not like a thing of arrogance, but just sort of a level of connection to the work.
Thank you.
Hi, how you doing? I'm in a kind of similar position that you spoke about earlier, being in grad school and trying to figure out sort of the next course of action. Something that's really important to me is because I guess found fine art so late in my life. I think it's important for the youth to have fine art be accessible. And so that's a weird sort of thing to navigate, being within the fine arts community, but also having work that's accessible for people that are not. So are there any tips you have for navigating that?
Yeah, I can give, I think it was early 2020. I was selected by the Arts Council, and there was another organization that organized this thing where they selected a number of artists to go into the public schools and do a project. And they did a week long of programming. And I worked with, was that Edison School for the Arts? It was called Edison School for the Arts. It's located down here near downtown. And the work was exhibited within a cafeteria. And I went and spoke. And it was amazing to see the kids and them engage with it. And I felt in that moment, that was sort of the intended place for it, if you will. And I think a lot of times there's this expectation when you get to a point in your making, your work may be in a certain place, so it's too good to be somewhere else. But I think it's up to the artist to be in control of that. And not let others dictate what you want and where you want your work to be seen. But I think also at the same time too, it's important to, wherever you exhibit your work, that whoever is handling the work or looking over are good stewards of the work as well. Because I've made decisions not so much about my work being in a particular place, but I had concerns with the venue and their ability to be a good steward of the work.
You guys are brilliant, and ask some really amazing questions. So I want to give everyone a round of applause for asking some really amazing questions. So we're coming close to the end of our time together. I want to know, is there anything that you're currently working on, or any points that you would like to communicate?
I'm working on, I don't know, I mentioned a number of them. But I think, aside from that, I just want to thank everyone who's been involved in this process. Yes. And, through Butter and, the opportunities that are being provided to the artists. And, thank you all. I think those are the most questions and, the most engagement that I've ever had, in a talk. And I really appreciate that. And it's an honor and a privilege to be here and to participate.
Yeah, you gave some really great insight. As an artist myself, the idea of a studio manager, I'm yes, sign me up, please. I try to communicate the importance of having sustainable infrastructure around artists. You should be able to create. and you should have a team around you that can help you do that. So it's really great to see what it looks like on the other end and to see you can create a legitimate, sustainable art practice and you're not burnt out and you can have a smile on your face and a happy family. Like, it's lovely to hear. So I want to say thank you for sitting and talking with me. Where could we find some of your work being shown currently or like your website or social?
I am on Instagram. That's the only social media presence I have. So if you just look up my name, you can find me. I'm not exhibiting anything locally right now. Hopefully in the near future, something will happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Well, I love that. Again, everyone, thank you so much for coming. My name is Greg Rose, the Curator Program Director at 1000 Words. This has been great. It's time for us to go now. Yes. All right.
Overrated. Trying to find the answers to why I cry, why I try. It gets hard sometimes to stand up.